to crawl inside yourself and close your eyes real hard, and then when you open them, be transported to back when you were 10 again. I'm having one of those days. I'm about to open up this new and exciting chapter of my life, and it scares me. So I want to retreat back into a fantasy. I want it to be Saturday. I want my parents to not be divorced. And I want to sit in front of my TV and play Majora's Mask all day. And you know what? So let's do that. Let's travel back in time and let's talk about some fucking Nintendo 64 games. Maybe ones that'll like remind you a little about like death and destruction. Yeah, come on.
The N64 is famous for a lot of things.
It was arguably the first console capable of full 3D. It challenged the limitations of human biology with its three-handed controller, and it popularized 4-player couch co-op to the point that the console is
Basically synonymous with it.
But one thing that the N64 is definitely not famous for or synonymous with is horror games.
Because, you know, it has 1, 2 if you count Doom.
Which you should, because it is noticeably darker and spookier than its predecessors. But the N64 still has a number of games with darker themes, whether it's gothic-inspired visuals, a dystopian setting, or games that downright take place in a classic horror setting. It actually has a lot of those games that we would now call horror for kids, and a lot of them are awesome and you should play them. And while the N64's library overall is pretty small compared to its contemporaries, there are still hundreds of games to sift through if you want to find the ones with the really good spooks. But I have of course done the research for you, and I'm gonna take you on a journey through each and every one of them.
Because this is your complete guide to dark and disturbing games on the Nintendo 64.
Initially released on DOS in 1995 and 2 years later on the N64 in 1997, Hexon is the sequel to Heretic, one of the first games that the Doom wave gave birth to, and it's the second of the Serpent Rider trilogy, a game that will conclude with the annoyingly named Hexon II. In the first game, we killed the first Serpent Rider, so it of course makes sense that in the second one, we killed the second Serpent Rider, and that is what the plot is. Changes from the previous game include the ability to pick between 3 characters that have different stats and available weapons, essentially functioning like different RPG classes, which is pretty cool to see in a shooter. And the second and final big change is that Hexon takes place in a Metroidvania-esque hub world. All of the levels connect to a central hub and can be entered and exited at the player's leisure, and at several points, switches and levers will need to be pulled up and down in several levels to open up doors back in the hub world.
Play it if you think a Doom clone set in a dark fantasy world sounds pretty cool, which it does, so you should.
Doom rocked the world, and the games industry took notice. A group of developers that was quick to take notice was 3D Realms, who dusted off their old action platformer IP, Duke Nukem, and took the franchise into glorious first-person kind of 3D, with the phenomenal game Duke Nukem 3D, released in late January 1996. Taking place after the 2 platformer games sometime in the early 20th century, Duke is making his way back to Earth so that he can take a vacation, but while attempting to land, his ship comes under fire, and he learns that Earth is now a dystopian hellhole, but also under attack by an alien force, who are stealing all the babes so they can impregnate them and make more evil aliens. Smooching babes was Duke's #1 priority on his vacation, so he's not too happy with them being kidnapped. So he decides to do something about the whole alien invasion thing. And he travels all over the world, and he saves as many babes as he can, and he kicks as many pig cops in the ass as he can.
Play it if you love Duke. Hail to the king, baby.
In 1996, with Doom 2 on store shelves and the development of a follow-up handed off to the best Doom mappers in the industry, ID was freed up to pursue other projects, and they went about making a technological successor to Doom, a little game called Quake. Quake is bigger and badder than Doom in every way except maybe in color scheme. The levels are bigger, they're in full 3D, and they feature true verticality, unlike Doom, which at best emulated it. The enemies are also full 3D this time, and so are the guns. Like I mentioned just a minute ago, The color scheme leaves a little something to be desired though. This doesn't look pretty, but here's the thing. Quake is brown for technical reasons, as brown was the color scheme that allowed for the greatest number of colors on screen to be showed simultaneously, due to a complicated technical reason that can most simply be described like this. Wallpapers were a big thing on personal computers, and developers of hardware and OS software tried their best to enable computers to properly show off high-resolution images. This meant focusing on making earth tones as close to life as possible, as those tones are easier for humans to tell apart, and therefore, computers were able to display way more earth tones than any of the other color tones. And at least that's how the whole Quake is brown thing has been explained to me. Quake would eventually make its way to most consoles, including the N64 in 1998, and the plot is about you, the protagonist, being sent in along with your team to eliminate the enemy called Quake, before they can take possession of a teleportation device that Earth has just developed apparently. In what would become a staple of the shooter genre, shit goes tits up fast and you're in would-be classic fashion, the only survivor of the assault on Quake's fortress, and it's up to you all by your lonesome to battle Quake's death squads and collect the 4 treasures of the elements and to use them to stop Quake's invasion of Earth. Quake 2 would receive a port on the system a year later, and this time you play as another guy fighting another enemy. Some people say that Quake 2 is the true beginning of the series, as it introduces what would become the series' most famous antagonists, the Strogg, who would come back in the final single-player installment of the franchise, Quake 4.
Play it if you like fast-paced shooters and a good challenge.
What do you get when you combine Jurassic Park and Doom? Well, on the 4th of March 1997, and every subsequent year until the final installment released in 2000, we got the answer in the form of Turac. It's a first-person shooter that sees the player take up the mantle of Turac, a chosen one that's sworn with protecting the portal between our world and the pocket dimension of the Lost Land. And you do this by hunting down keys and levels, opening up new levels and gunning down everyone in your way, whether they be aliens or rabid dinos. Something cool about the series, with the exception of Rage Wars, the multiplayer-focused spin-off, is that the games are all connected and each of them leads into the other, but you play as a different Turac every time. In the first one, you are Talset, and you stop an evil entity known as the Campaigner from assembling a scepter that can be used to harness the power of the Lost Lands. The events of that game awaken the Primogen, the actual creator of the Lost Lands, who has been imprisoned within them, and the new Turac, Joshua, sets out to stop him with some help of some alien friends. And the climactic end of that game causes a cataclysmic event to almost destroy the neighboring realm of Oblivion, and its inhabitants are not very happy with that, and they set out to punch a hole between their world and the world of the living so that they can suck the life force from our world and repair their own world. And they are initially successful, murdering the previous Turac Joshua in the process, forcing either his sister or his brother to take up the mantle and stop them in the final game. It's a great trilogy of games, and it's a bit of a shame that they haven't been remade for modern audiences. I would love a Doom 2016 updated take on this series of games.
Play it if you like awesome retro shooters with just enough story to keep you engaged.
Often confused for a port or a remake of the first Doom, Doom 64, released on the 4th of April 1997, is actually a full-on sequel to the original trilogy of Doom games. After the events of Final Doom, which is the sequel to Doom 2, it's decided that the UAC stations, the bases where the portals to hell were all created and all that, were simply too dangerous to keep around. But since they couldn't be destroyed because, they were linked to hell and all that, they were instead poisoned with extreme levels of radiation, and for a very long time, that was it. No demons got through. Until one day, when something does get through, and it starts resurrecting demons, which of course prompts Doom Guy to jump back into action, and he kills the demons and enter hell to see what is up. Turns out that this was Hell's plan all along, as they have personal beef with Doom Guy for doing, Doom Guy things. So after he slaughters all of the demons in the area, including the mother demon who was behind the plan to lure him here, he then decides to stay in Hell to keep the demons down, as he figures that this will be the only way that he can keep humanity safe. Which is a pretty cool ending, because this ties directly into the Doom 2016 reboot, which incidentally also saw the game's aesthetic fully embrace the gothic look, something that this game in particular is definitely toying with more than the previous games in the series.
Play it if you want more Doom.
Released on the 30th of September 1997, Nightmare Creatures opens in the 1800s as a book is sent to the home of Ignatius Blackwood. The book is a diary and an account of what really caused the Great Fire of London. A cult known as the Brotherhood of Hecate were trying to create an elixir to grant people superhuman powers, but it instead turned them into horrific monsters. The cult, determined to make the best of the situation, created an army of these disgusting mutants and tried to take over London. But one of their own members got cold feet and started what would become the Great Fire of London, which stopped the army of monsters and also conveniently took care of any evidence of their existence. The timing is not random, as reports and sightings of monsters eerily similar to the accounts in the diary are popping up all over London. When Ignatius sends the diary to his friend, who is an immunologist, and the friend then promptly gets murdered and the book gets stolen, Ignatius then travels to London with the murdered doctor's daughter Nadia to investigate the reports of the monster sightings. This is such a good setup for a gothic noir tale, and I do generally enjoy those late 90s, early 2000s Victoria era monster movies. But Nightmare Creatures really doesn't scratch that same itch for me. It's meant to be a survival horror game, but it has very actiony gamey combat with straight up combos like a fighting game. And it has an adrenaline meter that starts ticking down whenever you're not fighting. And if it reaches 0, you then start losing health, which seems antithetical to the survival horror formula.
Play it if you scrolled past it for the last decade or two when you were looking for a 5th generation game and then just decided not to play it. Because at some point you're gonna have to see it for yourself that it's kind of a shit show.
In 1996, Capcom released Resident Evil, and it was pretty alright. So on the 21st of January 1998, they released Resident Evil 2, which is an amazing game, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, as it was an absolute smash hit. So much of a smash hit that Capcom decided that it was worth it to spend $1 million in 1990s video game money to create a very ambitious port for the N64, which compressed the game's assets from 700 MB down to 32 MB so that it could fit on a cartridge. The sound and the compression on some of the visuals are noticeably a little different, but not in a way that I would call bad. Maybe a little worse than the PS1 version, but definitely not bad. Out of all of the popular PS1 games to get N64 ports, Resident Evil 2 makes the most complete transfer, and it even has a few extra things, like files scattered across the map that expands the lore of the series, and some extra costumes for the cast. I know literally everyone that clicks on this video knows what Resident Evil 2 is and how it plays and what the story is, but for good measure. It takes place shortly after the events of the first game, but starring a new set of characters. One of them is Leon S. Kennedy, a cop that is starting his first day today, and Claire Redfield, the sister of Chris Redfield, one of the protagonists from the first game, as she takes time off from her college studies to come to Raccoon City to look for her brother, who has gone missing while out searching for the people that went missing in the Raccoon Forest in the first game. Their luck could not be worse, as the zombie infection that we saw ravage the forest in the first game makes its way to the big city. And before Leon can start his job and Claire can ask anyone about Chris, the city is turned into a post-apocalyptic wasteland where more flesh-hungry cannibals roam the streets than walking, talking human beings. With nothing better to do, they decide to try and make their way out of Raccoon City, which is easier said than done, and they navigate the famous police station from the series, as well as some cool other secondary locations. And in traditional survival horror fashion, they find objects, keys and other items, and battle the undead using what limited arsenal they have available.
It's an absolute classic, and you should play it if you like good horror games.
Not every first-person shooter in the 90s copied Doom. Some of them copied Descent, an amazing first-person 6 degrees of freedom shooter. And Forsaken is one of them, released on the PC on the 24th of April 1998 and a week later on the N64 that same year. There is not much to explain here. Earth became uninhabitable after a science experiment gone wrong scorched the entirety of the surface. Most of the survivors were evacuated into colonies in space, and the only people that really remained on the planet are scavengers and raiders combing the underground for treasures left behind in the rush, including a very special one. In most versions you play as one of the scavengers looking for the legendary lost treasure, but in the N64 version you are a homicidal maniac that's just here to kill raiders and scavengers for the fun of it. 6 Degrees of Freedom takes a little bit of your time getting used to, but once you adjust your brain to understand that there is no up and there is no down, it is a blast to play.
Play it if you want a shooter that's just a little different.
I'm not a big arcade guy, and I'm not a big hack and slash guy either, but I am a big co-op guy, and I absolutely freaking love Gauntlet, and the series has been a staple on pretty much every Nintendo console up until the current day, and the N64 is no exception, as it in October 1998 got Gauntlet Legends. It didn't make the most graceful or pretty entry into the third dimension, just like a lot of other franchises, but just like its predecessors, it is a 4-player hack and slash dungeon crawler where you play as either the mighty warrior, the amazing wizard, the sneaky archer, or the awesome Valkyrie. The story is simple, like it always is. There's an evil guy who wants to take over the land, or maybe already has, and it's up to you and your potential party to kill his lieutenants guarding the 4 treasures of the elements and combine them into a legendary weapon that will weaken the big bad, because then you will then have a chance to kick his ass.
Play it if you're a fan of hack and slash games, especially retro ones.
Originally supposed to be a launch title for the system, but pushed back to the 30th of September 1998 because the original publisher, Nintendo, had a bit of an issue with all the violence and gore. Body Harvest is an action game with a lot of environmental destruction, made by the developer DMA before they changed their name to Rockstar and got famous for making a certain other series. The plot is that an alien race has visited Earth every 25 years for the purposes of harvesting humans, and over the course of the last couple hundred years, this has brought humanity to the brink of extinction, with the remnants now living on a space station in orbit of the planet, thinking that they will be safe here since it's technically not on Earth. The aliens are not picky though, and the game opens up as the aliens arrive on the station and begin harvesting like it's just another visit to Earth. You play as Adam Drake, and you are not about to let the aliens harvest you, so you fight them off and run to the time machine that Earth has been secretly making, and you board it and you travel back in time to stop the invasion before it even happens. And that is what each level is, showing up in various points in the past and murdering the aliens before they can harvest the local population there. What makes Body Harvest stand out is that its levels are huge for the time and a little open-ended, and you can travel them using various vehicles you find around, and there are side objectives like finding a plane so you can fly to another island, putting out fires with fire trucks, or maybe just mowing down more aliens. The objective of each level is to repel the alien invasion, take out their ship and then kill their boss. And you do this across the world and across times in destinations such as Greece, America, Indonesia, Russia, you name it.
Play it if you're a fan of the N64 aesthetic and don't want to play a game that requires that much higher brain function.
Do you remember Shadowgate, that first-person impressive but primitive 3D-esque adventure game on the NES? Well, it had not one, but 2 sequels, and one of them was Shadowgate 64, released on the 31st of May 1999. Unlike its predecessors, and other games like them which were very menu-heavy, Shadowgate 64 has a very simplified interface system that relies on just a couple of button prompts. That, and the fact that this is a full 3D game that you can walk around in and look around in at your leisure. Unlike the remake of the first game, which utilizes only still images and came out 13 years after this one, is impressive. And the full 3D navigation combined with the simpler interaction makes this probably my favorite Shadowgate of at least the 3 I've played. And the story isn't half bad either. The simple version is that after the events of the first game, the kingdom, despite the protagonist's best efforts, falls back into ruin and chaos, and becomes a haven for bandits and raiders. And centuries later, the protagonist of Shadowgate 64, Del, is traveling across the kingdom with a caravan to escape the turmoil of what is happening. But the caravan is raided and Del is captured and taken to the Shadowgate. Here he uncovers the plot to resurrect the big bad guy from the first game, and he sets out to collect the 4 treasures of the elements and stop the resurrection ritual.
Play it if you like those gothic adventure games.
So Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Eva as it would colloquially be known, was starting to become a big thing in the West by the early 2000s, but by the time that Bandai Namco had started to make a game about it, it hadn't quite reached the popularity that would warrant a localization on the N64. So, on the 25th of June 1999, Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Neon Genesis Evangelion 64 as it is known in the fandom, released on the N64 exclusively in Japan. And it's a largely faithful adaptation of the anime in form of a hybrid gallery shooter and mecha fighting game, in all its awkwardly misinterpreted and heavily debunked Western psychology glory. At its most simple, Eva is about a world in conflict. It's 2015. Evil robots known as angels have eradicated about 75% of humanity, and you play as one of the 3 characters from the anime, who grew up during this great conflict. And you're recruited to the Eva program, and each level is you fighting off the angels that have come to Earth. And you do this from your so-and-so comfort of your giant mecha. First, you enter an arena and start shooting buildings until an angel reveals itself, and then you go up against it. And in a remember that game Busted Roof? The gameplay is like that, and after you complete that sequence, a scene from the anime will play. I'm not a particularly big fan of Eva. I think its themes, like I mentioned earlier, are heavy-handed, and that its dick riding of heavily discredited early 20th century German psychoanalyst Freud and Jung is problematic. But I will admit that to teenagers and people that grew up in more conservative and conformist cultures than mine, this is a poignant nihilistic criticism of la society. And while I think it's bad, I think that watching it when you are at a certain point in your human journey can open you up to examining things and make you re-evaluate your life and the beliefs that you held up until that point. And I think that's impressive for a piece of media to make you do that. And I have seen that happen to people, and I will give the franchise that at least.
Play it if you're a fan of Eva already.
Horror games come in many shapes and sizes and genres, but there is one to me that is horribly underutilized, and that is tactical games. Ever since I played the amazing PlayStation tactical turn-based RPG Koudelka, I have been on the lookout for tactics RPGs that scratch that same itch. Something about that style of play just naturally creates a sense of tension. And it's a bit of a shame that horror games haven't really embraced that genre of gameplay systems. Ogre Battle 64, released on the 14th of July 1999, isn't a horror game at all. But it is a game that takes place during a bloody revolution with some heavy themes, and more importantly for the point I'm making, it's a tactics game. In Ogre Battle, you play as some dude who joins the rebellion, and then the rebellion starts to take over the land and fight the overwhelming odds of their oppressors. It is definitely a game that has a vibe that is darker than something you would usually see on the N64, and the way the combat works definitely adds to that oppressive and tense atmosphere.
Play it if you also loved Koudelka and you've been looking for something to scratch that same itch, because it's almost that.
When people compare the 5th generation libraries, and particularly those of the N64 and the PS1, one game that is often pointed to as being a game that N64 owners missed out on is Metal Gear Solid. But that's bullshit, because Konami made an MGS game for the N64, and it's called Hybrid Heaven. It released a couple of years after MGS on the 5th of August 1999, and it's amazing. In the game, you are a synthetic human created by a race of evil aliens that are trying to overthrow the United States government by replacing key personnel with synths such as you. So the game opens up and you are accompanying a synth replacement of a government official, but while waiting to do the body swap, something comes over you when you notice a random woman in a crowd, and you then end up shooting the synth that you are here to actually replace with a real human, and you sabotage the entire operation. As you're taking to the evil alien hideout, you beat up your armed escort and find yourself loose in the big evil alien compound. And with the help of a rogue cell of good guy aliens, you make it your mission to wipe out the evil guys and get back to that woman in the crowd because, I don't know, she was hot, I guess. And if that isn't some Metal Gear shit, then I don't know what is. Inside the compound, you navigate the game world like you would in any other action-adventure stealth game, and you solve puzzles, shoot enemies, etc. But where Hybrid Heaven gets a little weird is when you come face to face with one of the other aliens. Because then the game turns into something that isn't exactly a turn-based fighting game, but has the basic feeling of one. and here you pick what attacks to do and what body parts to do them with, and you execute them and pummel your enemies unless they go limp on the floor and fall down. And the unique mechanic of Hybrid Heaven is its RPG mechanic of leveling up specific body parts as opposed to just leveling up your stats.
Play it if you want to see the N64 pushed to its absolute fucking limits.
Duke is back in Duke Nukem 0 Hour, which released 3 years after Duke Nukem 3D in 1999 on August the 31st. Partially based on the Duke Nukem PS1 game Time to Kill, Duke is, like in that game, called back into action by the government when the aliens start messing with the timeline. That, and the change to a third-person perspective, is about where the similarities end though. In 0 Hour, the aliens are out to kill Duke's ancestors so that he won't be able to stop them in the future, because you know, he won't be around. And when the game begins, Duke does fail to stop the aliens from going back, and he finds himself in a parallel dimension where New York has been turned into a radioactive wasteland, leaving most of the population dead, and the sort of survivors as zombie-like flesh-hungry cannibals. Duke finds himself linking up with the Resistance, and with their help and their time machine, he chases after the aliens across time and space, going to such exciting locations as the Wild West, Victorian England, and different New Yorks.
Play it if you like Duke and appreciate stupid time travel, because it's got both of those things.
In 1888, Jack the Ripper is disappointed that all of the murders that he had committed up until now have not unlocked the mythical power within him like he thought they would. A being then appears to him and tells him that the power he seeks, it does exist, but that he must seek it out in the dead side and build it up there. Jack then promptly commits suicide to gain access to this realm, and he then sets up a cursed asylum in the dead side and starts to train a roster of killers. Then, in the present day, on August 31st, Michael Leroy is chosen as the new Shadowman, a protector of the world of the living. Michael learns of Jack's cursed asylum in Deadside, and that Jack is being used as a pawn to bring about the apocalypse. And Michael then enters Deadside and finds a weapon that will allow him to trigger an eclipse that will let him use his Shadowman powers in the real world. And he then starts hunting Jack's disciples to reap their souls and hopefully stop the apocalypse. Shadowman is one of those games that's just a few details away from being an excellent Zelda-like, but it was good enough to warrant a sequel that would come out exclusively on the PS2 a few years after this game.
Play it if you want to play a horror game that is steeped in a voodoo aesthetic, but done in a more tasteful way than what we've usually been seeing.
Like so many other franchises of this era, especially on the N64, Rayman made the transition into 3D with the phenomenal Rayman II on the 29th of October 1999, landing on this platform before anywhere else, at least for a week until the PC version hit store shelves in early November. While it is a game primarily aimed at children, it is dark as shit. The story is that a genocidal gang of robot pirates travels the galaxy in their flying ships, and they exterminate planets and enslave their population for some nefarious purpose. And as Rayman 2 opens up, it is sometime since they attacked the home of our hero, the world known as the Glade of Dreams, and enslaved him and all of his friends, and then began extracting the planet of its life essence, which will eventually kill it, like they've killed over 100 planets before it. In the opening, Rayman escapes, and while he's depowered because of something the pirates did to him, he nonetheless begins to fight them and search for a way to power up, and also begins to search for his allies to help him take down the invaders. It is a great game that is a mix of platformer and rudimentary action game, and has some fun gameplay diversion such as a Subway Surfer-esque endless runner minigame that occasionally breaks up the pace. It is not horror, but something about being chased by a giant demon that destroys the level itself to get to you. It leaves an impression on you when you are 9. I know it did to me.
Play it if you like Super Mario 64, but you would like to know what an alternate version of that game would look like if you switched out Bowser for Joseph Stalin.